Welcome everyone to LPC. If we can get everyone to quiet down and take their seats. Mr. Gruber. I feel like we should do like the Scout Quiet Coyote thing. Okay. All right. Welcome everyone to our February 24th LPC. This is our second to last in-session LPC. So we have a lot to get through today. First order of business is to approve the February 18th minutes, which I'm sure everyone enjoyed reading over the weekend. Do we have a motion? A motion from Tammy Tran, a second from Dan Dugan. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Great. I had the opportunity to spend half of our last meeting in person and half online. And what I learned about spending that half online is it's really important that we wait for the microphone to be passed because the people online cannot hear us if we're not on the microphone. And it continues to be really important that you introduce yourself so that those people online aren't playing the guessing game of who you are and what city you represent. So hi, I'm Kate. I'm from Bountiful. A couple things to make you aware of. As I mentioned, this is our second to last LPC. There are a couple key things that are going to start to happen at this point in the legislative session. Today is actually the last day for the legislature to take action on a bill that they want the governor to have to play his role, sign or veto before the end of the session. On Friday the 28th, that's when they get through their last appropriations decisions and start drafting those final appropriations bill. Heads up, budgets are tight. There's not really any extra money to go around. The focus of the legislature this week will be on working on their own bills in their own chamber and trying to clear those bills through the process so that they can make sure they're in the opposite chamber. So you'll see some later floor time today and again on Thursday trying to make that happen. Tuesday, the 4th, is actually their last day to consider bills from their own house. So a lot of exciting and fun and stressful things happen in these last few days that we wanted to just make you aware of. We've wanted to make sure, and by the way, please make sure you sign in online. We've wanted to make sure that Slido is working for everyone. So if everyone could do the thing and launch your Slido, we have a little test to make sure this is working for everyone. So just to make sure this is working for everyone, we're going to ask this very important test question. There's lots of famous quotes about how important dogs are and how they lower blood pressure and how, especially if you're going to be in politics, you probably ought to have a dog because that'll be your only friend. And so as we head into these last few weeks, we wanted to check and see how important it is that each staffer with the League of Cities and Towns has a dog as our test vote to make sure that Slido is properly working. And in case you're wondering who this handsome hound is that you're seeing right here, it's mine. His name is Henry. All right, we'll give that just a minute, and then I'm going to turn things over to Justin to walk us through this very dense agenda. Thanks for taking this quiz. We'll make sure that since it's coming in that this is so very important that all league staffers have a dog.
I don't even know what I just walked into. This is what happens when the first vice president gets a hold of Slido. So today's agenda stuff is going to be moving all over the place just because we have some guests coming. We have a lot of things to talk about. League staff is running in and out to deal with different things. But Representative Casey Snyder graciously agreed to come talk about the gravel bill today. We talked about this a little week. There's new substitute language that has not yet gone public, but does clarify a few things. So Representative Snyder, have you come up and talk about some of what's looking to change and talk about what you're trying to do with the bill here.
Yeah, thank you. I asked security to make sure that they collected any tar and feathers before y'all got in here. So I can say whatever I want. You guys can't touch me right now. So, God dang it. Okay. So I'm going to take you on the miserable journey that has been my life the last couple of years. So at least if you hate me with cause rather than by speculating. Okay. Is that fair? So gravel is pretty much the worst area of policy I have ever dealt with. It's worse than water. And I don't know why, because it's just rocks. But all of you have an opinion and all of industry has an opinion, and none of the opinions are the same. So what it does is create severe pinch points for legislators such as myself. But if you go back, 2018 was really or 2019 with Logan Wild was really the last consensus gravel bill, even that not being considered consensus. And it tried to bring all the parties together to really figure out what is a pretty tough issue. I think he did his best then, and then he went off to greener pastures and Commissioner of Ag and all those things. And the promises of continuing that discussion were never had. That conversation sort of stalled out. So what you had in subsequent years, many of you may not have seen that, but there were these one-off bills that came every session for probably 3 years running, where there's a dream. Apparently somebody really loves a mine up one of these canyons and wants to force it through, and there were barrages coming from either the House or the Senate to fix this issue, rather than fixing the macro issue of gravel. So as you recall, I picked up one of those bills last session. We ran it through. When it finally hit committee, I changed it to a study, and the study has since gone forward. The study has highlighted some inconsistencies in the code. And what I had tried to do at the start of this summer is sit everybody down and say, okay, here's the really crappy bill that was here before the study existed. Let's see what we can fix and make in this bill to make it better. And I will tell you, everybody sucked in those discussions. How's that? We made no progress. We had hours and hours of meetings, and it was the most miserable, again, thing I've ever worked on. So I started over. And at the end of last year, we looked at a few Supreme Court cases, and we laid them out forward as a way to reboot this, right? Like, I'm not trying to tilt this one way or another. I'm finally trying to close this debate and do it in a very collaborative, transparent way. I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm not tied to any particular issue. I have gravel pits close to me, but I mean, they don't benefit either way on this. I'm just trying to land at a good policy space. So the initial bill rolls out. There's some concerns. We ran a sub. There's some concerns. I think hopefully in the third version of this that I submitted to go live, I know I have a consensus with industry. Salt Lake County has committed to me that they are going to go to neutral on this, and it's neutral with a smile. I don't know if anyone here is here from Salt Lake County. They were supposed to be here, those liars. Anyway, but they've committed to go to neutral, and we're not fighting anymore. And that the reason why that's significant is I know some of you have concerns about Parley's. If Salt Lake County is neutral on this bill, that in my mind reaffirms my promise and my word that this is not about Parley's Canyon. So for those of you who have heard that concern broader, I'm hoping that we have finally solved that, because I've committed not to making this bill about any one mine. I've worked with your league staff. They have been incredibly gracious with their time. I've tried to make sure their fingerprints are all over this, but at the same time, they hold you all in very high regard and respect, and have not committed in any way as they're not able to. So I'm not asking you to love this. This is a really, really hard issue, and it has made me say some really bad words to all parties involved. But what I would hope is that if you can look at this, take a step back, take the emotion out of this, and if it is fair, I'm not asking you to support it, but if it is fair, let us keep moving this along. I want to fix this issue, even though it's not great. Next year, we're going to come back, and we're going to clarify the regulatory scheme on this, because Dogum regulates some mines and you all regulate some mines, and there's not consistency. So we're not done with this, but I'm hoping that if you, again, will look at this in a pragmatic way, hopefully you will feel like it is what it was meant to be, which is a compromise bill. Anyway, but it's going to go live shortly. I'm going to leave it on there. I'm 24 hours at least before we run it. If you guys need additional time to review, I'm happy to do that. I'd like to move it off the board this week though. So that's what I got.
All right, do you have time for a couple questions?
Sure.
All right, we have time for a couple of questions.
Yeah.
So Megan's get the
You,
mic over.
you pick, I'll answer.
Yep.
Okay.
So a little bit of context. Paul Larson, Brigham City. A little bit of context behind this. You referenced 2019. It's probably accurate to say that was a consensus bill, but it was a consensus because there was a commitment from both the legislature and the industry to come back with consensus language that would eliminate the moratorium on local land use planning and zoning. That never happened. I was on, we called it the pit crew. There are probably others in this room that were part of that. I don't know if Gary Crane's here. He was working with us on drafting. We worked through the summer on that bill with the industry's attorney. And there came a point where I think we all felt like we had a bill that we could all agree to. Suddenly the industry went silent. Time went by, and then suddenly a new attorney from their side came along and said, hey, we want to track that, and here's our new proposal. To me, it meant that one, the industry never intended to bargain in good faith, and they didn't. Two, the legislature made a commitment. If you go back and watch the debate on that bill from 2019, you'll find there was a commitment made by the legislature to fix this issue. 6 years later, it's not fixed. We still have the moratorium. In fact, it's being further ingrained into land use regulation. 2 years ago, my senator was here with another gravel-related bill that had nothing to do with the land use issue. I asked him at that point, are we going to remove the moratorium that was put in place in 2019 and that the legislature committed to us would be removed? He said in this meeting right up there, next year. Well, next year came and went, nothing happened. Now we're into next year after that. And again, I don't see the moratorium disappearing. So from my perspective, if the moratorium removal is not in part of this bill, I'd move we oppose it.
Well, let me kind of say something here because I wasn't party to those. This is the first time I've had this discussion on this is the first time I've heard of moratorium with your staff, with any of the parties that are involved. So if that's something we got to address, I'm committed to it. But I do think it's a little unfair to hold me to a standard that I don't even know about, right? Like you're holding me, I want you to look at the substance of the bill because I wasn't party to those commitments, not aware of them. I'm willing to explore them. This is what I will promise you. If you as the league say this is something that's got to get addressed, let's roll it into a regulatory bill, which is coming next year. I am doing this and I don't want to do this. I am going to be looking at DOGM and I am going to be looking at local land use and that could be a part of it. I just don't know what you're talking about, right? And so that's
my perspective again from 2019 and the history I've got with this is if that's your intent, write it into the bill that next year this will be addressed. And if it's not addressed, that moratorium will sunset at the end of the session next year. I don't know how we can take a commitment to do something next year seriously with the history.
Well, and I mean, it's again, I don't have any context, zero. I haven't heard of it, but I can tell that you're probably frustrated and probably rightfully so. My commitment is to work on this and I want to be done. You got to remember the only reason I picked this up is because it was grenade going this way every session. And you guys remember this, right? So I've tried to take, hopefully those that have worked on this, I have tried to back the politics out of this. There's the Salt Lake County guy. Maybe he can say something like moderately positive about how this has landed, right? Like, thank you. But I'm really trying to land this in a way that puts this to bed. I don't want to be doing this anymore. This is terrible. I'd rather go work on a stupid water bill somewhere, right? Which you guys probably all hate those too. So it's fine. At least we're consistent. But anyway, just if I will work on this, you and I try and get a side conversation on this. Karsten, will you set something up here? I'll have you coordinate with my intern. Let's talk about this because I really want to understand what you're referencing. So.
Yeah, Norm, go ahead.
So Norm Beagley, Santaquin City, respectfully, this bill feels like another grenade coming towards us because the part of the bill that is most troubling to me and to our community is the preemption. This is literally, and maybe it's in the sub. I haven't seen the sub. If it is, that's great. But giving preemption to private companies is very troublesome to us.
So the sub hopefully addresses that. I've tried to increase the local control part. The problem is you've got this macro debate about vested mining. And some of these gravel pits are mines, which preempts all of that for you, right? And so I'm trying to find consistency in the statute, treat everybody the same and move forward. So you guys know, they know. I mean, it's not, what kind of world do you have two gravel pits sitting next to each other, mining the exact same material, being totally regulated in totally different ways? That does not make any sense. We got to fix that long term. So I'm trying to back into this slowly, consistency on the substrate and how we're going to manage that moving forward. And then anyway, go into next year. Look, I'm not going to stand here and tell you you're going to love it. I have tried to make improvements. I have tried to keep everybody at the table, but that's where we're at.
All right, we have time for maybe one more comment. Mayor Silvestrini. Okay, Mayor, go ahead. That's crazy, right?
Thank you, Jeff Silvestrini, Mill Creek. So, Representative, I haven't seen the sub, but I have talked with Salt Lake County about it, and I just want to thank you actually for being willing to work with us in some fashion. I know that there are still imperfections with this bill, but I'm trying to put a smile on my face.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's appreciated.
All right. Ken, one more. No, maybe I'll get you there.
Okay. No, I think, Ken Leatham, North Salt Lake City. I've been in some of these meetings with you, Representative. I guess I'm a little bit confused about the results of the study on two things. Number one, that said we had decades of supply of sand and gravel on the Wasatch Front. So there's really not an urgency to expand operators' rights to expand into new properties. And the second is just that preemption of local zoning, which is a big expansion as Norm said, of private industry being exempt from zoning. That's pretty distasteful for some of us who have gravel pits where mines could expand. They're already producing an air quality problem in our communities. And so anyway, I wondered if you had a response to that, especially on the urgency part. There doesn't seem to be an urgency to expand these rights right now.
So if you recall the narrative, do you recall what the narrative was that was pushing all of these bills that were very, let's say, lopsided maybe in fairness? Do you remember what the narrative was then? The narrative was that we are at the verge of whatever this study said. We're running out of gravel. It's going to cost, we're doubling the cost of freeways. We're doubling the cost of houses, all of those things. So we backed it up and the study says in 10 to 20 years, we're going to be at that point, right? But we've got time. And so what I'm trying to do is when there isn't that sense of urgency, when even to you guys, when you're not being leveraged in a discussion, is set the policy, right? If it's going to be good in 20 years, it should be good today. And nobody should be compelled to fix this. I'm just trying to pull the conflict out of this, right? And so that's why I think if we wait till we're on that doorstep, you're going to be in a much more uncomfortable position as cities, I would dare say, because then all of industry will come and say, you have to do this now or the sky is falling. And in 10 years, the Olympics will be on the state's doorstep. So I'm just trying to get the policy right now as we move into this. And on the preemption side, you know, again, it goes back to some of these fundamental definitions. We're trying to clarify those. It's kind of a balance. I've tried to put additional language in there so that you guys have some more robust rights to shut something down. You know, the initial bill was adjacent. If you look at mining statute, part of the reason we were trying to figure out that adjacent issue is because in mining law, which some of these are governed as mines, you can chase a resource in perpetuity down a vein. And that was the whole issue with Parley's, right? At least part of that discussion is the source is here. Doesn't matter that there's a freeway. We can go there based on mining law. And so the adjacent thing was trying to pull that actually in a little tighter. And I've tried to go another round tighter in the sub. And again, it's just coming live. So take a look at it. I don't expect you to sign on to something you haven't seen, but I at least wanted to come here and give you the context under which all of this is offered.
All right. Well, thanks, Representative
No,
Snyder.
where did Justin go? You have to come up here and say something moderately pleasant. Just
About gravel,
about
maybe.
gravel. Now I'm done.
Casey Snyder's not the worst.
Okay.
No, admittedly, Justin Stewart, I work with the mayor's office, Salt Lake County, and this is something we've been on the forefront of for multiple years now. And I would say, as far as grenades, there have been many grenades that have tossed, and I think this is far from a grenade. We're appreciative, and we're going to be neutral at this point because they've been so accommodating and working with us. And reality is, from our perspective, I think something is going to happen in the near future. If we hold back on this again, I don't think it's going to be beneficial to us. I think this is a good compromise, and that's why we are ended up being neutral. I think it's a good spot that we landed in at this point.
So, yeah, back Paul. So while the mic's going to Paul, here's what I'm going to say. Many of you are part of a kind of a reconstituted pit crew. We have a group that's been working on gravel. Language is still not public. We're waiting to see exactly what that language says when it drops, because there's been a little bit of back and forth since some of that's gone out there. So we're pretty close on that. We're going to have a meeting. I am sorry, it's probably going to be an early meeting, probably tomorrow morning. So if you've been in these gravel meetings, get ready for an invite to an early meeting, probably tomorrow, and we will go through this new language in depth and see if that moves the needle at all as we get
Just
there. But Paul,
Quickly, the reason I may sound so concerned about this issue, and I am, the entire east face of Brigham City on the mountains is zoned MU 160. Okay, it's sort of a holding zone. In MU 160 zone, it says that sand and gravel mining, gravel pits, I'm not going to call it critical infrastructure. That takes too long to say. It's a conditional use. Okay, back in the day when that was adopted, we had some controls. Now, under the current code, conditional uses are basically permitted. Okay, we now cannot go back and amend our zoning ordinance to take sand and gravel mining out of our MU 160 zone. And we cannot rezone the side of the mountain to some other zone that doesn't allow sand and gravel mining because of the moratorium that was put in place in 2019. I go back to there. I watched the hearings again to remind myself whether I was being accurate or not. There was a firm commitment from the legislator and the industry that we're going to come back next year and we're going to remove that moratorium. It's never happened and it needs to go away.
okay, we're going to jump on to other things. So Cam, going to have you come up because I know you've got to run to another meeting for a minute, and you can talk about tough.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody, for being here. This is the worst week of the year, bar none. Kate went through all the procedural reasons why it sucks, but just know this week is the peak silly season. Okay. So brace yourselves. If we send emails saying we need you to talk to your legislators, talk to your legislators right then and there. Drop everything, contact legislators, because this is the worst week of the year, and more will happen this week than the rest of the year when it comes to governance. Okay. With that being said, I have to present to the House Republican Caucus at 12:45 on the various housing and land use bills. So I'm going to go there and then I'll come back. Some of you are probably wondering how on earth all of my housing bills ended up at the end of the agenda. And that's why, because they stuck them at the end after I get back from that presentation. But there are a couple of things we need to hit and I'll be back. We've showed you this slide of what the difference is between a tax and a fee. And we told you we've been waiting for Senator Brammer's legislation in this space. As a reminder, we recommended support last week. We testified in support of Representative Karen Peterson's bill. And this looks very similar to House Bill 367 from last year with those differences that we've referenced before. Senate Bill 310 came out last week. This is Senator Brammer's addition on the transportation utility fee. Here are the key differences, bolded in 1 and 2, and then the note below is where they're the same. Key difference, lines 107 and 108 in Senate Bill 310 would say that a local government may not charge a transportation utility fee to a religious organization with nonprofit status. Okay, so that is one key difference. Key difference number 2 is SB 310 is a little unclear about the study requirements compared to House Bill 454, and the definition of transportation uses is narrower in SB 310 than it is in House Bill 454. Okay, SB 310 is also silent around public safety and broadband fees. So House Bill 454 is basically the three in one. SB 310 is just focused on transportation utility fee, but has the carve out for religious organizations with nonprofit status. The other definitions and processes are the same in both bills. We put together a table comparing and contrasting the differences between the two bills, but this is the quick summary. Our recommendation as staff is we oppose this bill as drafted because of lines 107 and 108 and what that precedent means. I say that with the acknowledgement that we have 9.5 business days to go. And this could turn into, like a lot of things up here in the last 2 weeks, a House versus Senate back and forth. So that tug of war is real, and there are going to be a lot of issues that we care about that will be part of that tug of war, including this, including House Bill 300 vote by mail, including some other bills we'll talk about later today. But I just wanted to explain why staff recommendation would be opposed as long as those two lines are still in the bill because of the precedent of not being able to charge users based on use. Any questions about those two bills and where we're at? Okay, I'm going to keep going then. House Bill 456, we reported to you last week that we were still trying to get some dollars to flow from this potential increase directly to cities. I have since put in italics section A because that piece is still in flux of what the state TRT piece is going to look like. It is not going to happen to have whatever that new revenue flowing directly to cities. That is not going to happen this session. So instead, we've now been focusing, based on the feedback we've gotten from the powers that be, been focusing on clarifying the tab, which is that Tourism Advisory Board, which is referenced above in 3B. So we want to just clarify that to make sure cities have a seat at the table for wherever this bill ends up landing. So still position pending, and our focus is now on clarifying the tab. Any questions on those two bills while I'm still here? Okay, in that case, Justin, I'm going to skip down to do, billboards, and then I'll come back. When I get back, I'll do 465 and 195. Does that work? Okay. Over the weekend, I sent out an email to our billboard work group about House Bill 198. Okay. As a reminder, we have actually asked several Slido questions to you about the original bill. And then there was the substitute that came out, and we stayed position pending on the substitute. We asked you on Friday to contact legislators because we still had concerns about that first substitute, and you delivered. That bill was circled because of the concerns that many legislators heard from you about where that bill was at. And I had multiple legislators coming up to me afterwards saying, where are things at? We're opposed until you guys get what you need in the bill. And there were a lot of legislators who really delivered. So thank you to you for your work, which then led to those legislators creating the space for the language that came on Saturday. To the credit of the industry, rather than kind of pushing forward with the bill as drafted, they listened to our main point here about focusing on the freeways and the relocation, same city. Now, we surveyed you last week to prioritize those three. And this was what the first substitute said. And then we asked you to prioritize. And what came back loud and clear from you was wanting clarification about the same city relocation. So in other words, using I-15 reconstruction as an example, if there's a billboard in North Salt Lake, in Kansas City of North Salt Lake, there's a billboard now that gets affected by the reconstruction. It can relocate within North Salt Lake, but it can't move without agreement of the neighboring city from North Salt Lake to Woods Cross. That was the point that you guys said was top priority. So that's what we pushed for. And we received the language over the weekend that would say there's unlimited relocation on the freeway, but still within the same city. So it's really not unlimited in this way the original bill was, where it could go city to city unlimited across freeway. But if your city has that frontage, it can go anywhere in that frontage, still subject to all of the other distance requirements. But then we have the clarification of the same city, which again, based on your feedback, was a top priority. And then the state mile will go from 0.5 mile to 1 mile, but still with that same city language. The feedback from the billboard work group over the weekend was positive, that felt like this was a good middle ground. And so you'll see our staff recommendation for substitute 2 would be to go from opposition to neutral. But we wanted to kind of bring it up to the broader group. We didn't hear from every city in the work group, but we heard from quite a few. Are there questions or thoughts about this bill? You'll ratify it at the end, but the bill sponsor's waiting to hear from us about our recommendation. Paul, do we?
The only question I had remaining, oh, sorry, Paul Larson, Brigham City. The only question I had remaining from the email that you sent out, the issue of if there's still room on the site for the billboard to be relocated on the same site, can they still choose to relocate somewhere else, which can lead to a net increase in the number of billboards?
Yeah, that's a good point, Paul. And that's something we talked about extensively with both the bill sponsor and the industry. And basically where we came to is there was not an easy way to codify prioritizing staying on the same site. The industry indicated their preference is to stay on the same site, just move inland a little bit because that site's been working for them. But we couldn't come up with a good way to codify a preference. Okay. Ken?
I just want to say thanks to Cam and others who worked so hard on this to get these changes made, including everybody here. The reason this is, to me, is different than most billboard bills is because the industry is going to be impacted by the I-15 reconstruction. To me, there's a need here that makes it different than other billboard bills that we've fought in the past. And so I think we really ought to seriously consider neutral. If you're looking for a motion, I can make that, but we should change now from opposition to neutral.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, Ken Leatham, North Salt Lake.
Perfect. Todd,
There's one little hole in the drafting that I think we need to pay attention to. An adjacent property, if it were in another municipality, would be available, the way the statute is drafted right now.
okay,
So
so even though
the-
the same city language is in there, we just need to make sure it applies.
I would bump that up to the main clause of the subsection and not create its own subsection. Otherwise, I think
got it.
it's
Yeah, good technical point there. So again, our recommendation would be to switch from opposition to neutral. You'd ratify that at the end of the meeting based on Ken's point with the important caveat that Todd brought up. And then Paul, I think as these conversations happen in your cities, I think you just push for that site still works. Let's keep it there. But good points all the way around. Okay. I'm going to run up to the House Republican Caucus. I'll be back to hit other bills. Justin, I will turn it back to you guys to continue.
I failed to make an important introduction at the beginning of the meeting, so I have to hurry and correct that. We have a visitor who used to be one of our number, used to be on our board, former mayor of Blanding, Logan Monson, who is now in the State House, and I invited him to come back and chat with us for just a minute and give us a teeny bit of a view from the other side and why our side is actually the best side. So I look forward to that view.
This side is much easier, I would say, than this side that I'm currently on. But yes, Logan Monson was the mayor down in Blanding for a few years, on city council for 4, and then here just this year. So I've only made the switch the last couple months now. I would probably say that probably the biggest and most important thing to me is having, like, your guys' list that we get is so helpful to me, especially for understanding just the group that is involved in this, the number of people that are actively involved and how it impacts cities specifically. Really is important to me. Bonus points if you're from rural Utah, because I mean, Cam can tell you that was a big thing for me, is understanding the rural piece and how these bills impact rural Utah. It is a lot, and it's fast paced and it's moving fast. Know your representatives, specifically the ones that are going to take your input and listen to it. Know who you can work with, because it makes a big difference when these changes are happening so fast and we're getting subs right before they go up and all kinds of things. So it's crazy. I don't know all the tricks, so I'm not giving inside tips, I guess, but just continue to be engaged. It's super helpful for me. Staff has my cell phone number. If I can help in any way, this group can have my personal cell phone number. If you want to write it down, if it's in the text or whatever, 435-459-9349. I have two phones. I have my legislative phone, my personal phone. I'll always answer my personal phone, and the legislative phone sometimes takes a break. But thank you for being engaged and involved and understanding how state policy impacts municipal, local policy. So thank you. Thanks. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Mayor. Now Representative. Appreciate it. All right. We're going to run back. Like I said, we're going to be a little bit all over on the agenda. So if you're following closely on the agenda, stop now. We will get to things. We're going to go way back, though, for a second here. All right, 511. This one's really easy. HB 511 seeks to impose a non-binding opinion question requirement for local governments to increase property taxes. This one is going to interim. It's going to be heard in committee tomorrow. Does not have the votes to get out per the sponsor, not just by our own count. So this one's going to interim. It's not anything that we need to worry about. So we're not going to spend any time on it. So that one was quick. All right, a couple other ones just want to put on your radar. This one, county formation amendments by Representative Tusher. This creates the process for creating a new county within a county with a population over 1 million. So Salt Lake County. Everybody else, you can zone out for a second, unless you're Utah County and you're knocking on the door in a few years. The total population of the municipality splitting off must be greater than 330,000. The process cannot split up existing municipalities, and this requires a feasibility study and a vote. So this is not proposing a new county. It's not proposing a split. We've seen bills like that in the past, but this one creates the process if someone wants to do that. The bill's a little bit more in depth with that. Our position recommended on this one is neutral, but willing to take anybody's thoughts on this one. But mostly just want to put it on your radar. Motion to make the population lower from Davis County. I take that as a non-serious motion. Okay. Mowing ordinances. This one from Senator Dan McKay was heard in committee this morning in this very room and was passed out. Prohibits a municipality from enacting an ordinance which restricts golf course maintenance between the hours of 5 a.m. and 10 p.m. This came from, of course, a specific instance where some folks who lived around a golf course complained to a municipality. Municipality felt like they should pass an ordinance that restricted some of this. And of course, that means we need a bill for it. The question we have on this one, so this is your time to pull out Slido. One, if you are a city with a private golf course and you have ordinances like this, reach out to me. I'd just like to learn a little bit more of what the universe looks like on this one. So if you have a city and you have private golf courses, if you have noise ordinances that would conflict with this, please let me know. So this means from 5 a.m., you could not stop someone from doing maintenance starting at 5 a.m. and then at 10. So you could stop someone from 10:01 p.m. to 4:59 a.m. But during the daytime, and 5 a.m. is now daytime in this bill, you can't prohibit anything. I do not believe it applies to miniature golf, no. Megan, we have one in the back here. Councilmember, you can yell it out if it's quick. Private golf courses, yes. Yep, so this applies to private golf courses. If it is a public golf course, you can set your own rules for it. You can tell your mowers when to go out. So Slido question on this one is how high of a priority is preserving the ability of local governments to enforce noise ordinances on golf courses after 5 a.m.? So I know many of you have ordinances. 5 a.m. is pretty early. I got up and testified in committee today that we thought 5 a.m. was probably a little earlier than we need to probably be mowing things. but just want to put this one on the radar. Again, if you have a private golf course, reach out to me, talk to me about this one, but I'm just going to take some input on this one quick. All right, going to give it no more time. 542, who's going to talk about this one? I don't even know who put this slide together. All right, what this one does, HB 542, is it ends the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission, so the UEOC. The Commission on Housing Affordability, the CHA, will continue. It puts some things into GOEO, the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity, which is responsible for economic development strategy, including consistency with state water policy, population growth, rural needs, and there's some technical changes to the Utah Broadband Center. This is another one that we recommend being neutral on. If anyone has spent the last 4 years in UEOC meetings, this is not the end of the world. It's going to open up a bunch of time, perhaps. But yeah, council member Megan, you got Mike over here.
Well, serious question. Why are we not in support? I mean, UEOC.
If you want to move to sport, we certainly could look at that.
UEOC was a difficult process that increased that happened during the interim, and it also happened largely outside of OPMA.
You have not found the sweet spot yet, but
so it seems to me that if this process isn't going to become more open like the rest of the interim process, then it's probably good that it's sunsetting and going away.
Yeah. So yeah, those are very good points. The reason that we're more neutral, and we can bring it back here, more neutral than support is we don't plan on doing much on the bill, even if we support it. And we tend not to take support positions when we're not really going to do anything to support it. So if we go to support, then we will probably do something. But Mayor.
As one who has spent an awful lot of time in UEOC meetings over the last 4 years, it was never created, if you'll recall the history of UEOC, it was created, Governor Cox created the UEOC, the legislature created it, but the governor wanted the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission. And the intent of that commission, it was by statute that there were all these certain seats, and the league had a seat on that. And anyway, to help create the master plan for how Utah is going to work going forward. And legislators came in and were part of all of it. There's 1,000 subcommittees. It's been a lot of work. A lot of really bright people have spent a lot of time working on things. And then they've come together as recommended bills for the legislative session time, right? And it's been a lot. Kate's right. It's great. It's been a lot over the interim. It's been a lot. But it was never intended to be forever. It was not created to be forever. And so for that reason, it's not I don't think, well, clearly maybe I'm wrong, but maybe it's not a second term priority for the governor. And since it's chaired by the governor and the executive director of GOEO with the speaker and the president as vice chairs, whatever, I think they're the ones that have decided we're going to change the structure. We've accomplished what we wanted to with that 4-year committee. And so it makes sense to me that this goes away.
Right. So unless Councilmember Bradshaw, you're making a motion to change, you're hedging, you're thinking. Okay, so do you want to move to support, or do you want to keep it a neutral?
I want to make a motion that we support it going away.
Okay. Second, well, Councilmember, you're in charge of the vote, so.
All in favor of agreeing with Kate, please say aye. Any opposed? Awesome. Sorry, I don't recognize any noises from Saratoga Springs. Looks like it passes.
That's a broad motion. I think that's where some of the hesitation was, perhaps. Let's see. Okay, HB 504. Jared, is Chris here? Okay, we'll jump over to Chris then. Oh, yep, there he is, right in the back. Okay, turn it over to Jared.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Chris is coming all the way Taylorsville, right? Vineyard, okay.
Well, I'm from House Caucus right now. So
Oh,
not
okay,
that far
okay,
away.
not that far. Well, it's good to have Chris here. He is the Chief Privacy Officer of the Office of Data Privacy. And right now, up on the screen, you'll see some of the, we've been over this before in prior meetings with some of the things that the HB 444 does. But we wanted to have an opportunity to have Chris present on the data privacy bill. And there was a first substitute as well on this. And just turn the time over to Chris.
Thank you. This is only my second time presenting to this group, so I'm still getting used to the makeup. How many people in here are elected? It's like the majority. Okay, so a lot of what I say, this may be new to the elected officials, and then those who are city staff or town staff, or maybe your city managers. Hopefully, some of what I say isn't brand new. So HB 444 is part of our multi-year process to modernize the privacy requirements for the state. We presented last year a new, and it passed, the Government Data Privacy Act that established a forward-looking strategy to help entities come into compliance with privacy laws. Multiple assessments and audits have found, generally across entities, we have been non-compliant with the privacy obligations outlined in both GRAMA and the Division of Archives and Records Service section of code. This includes requirements related to giving notice anytime we collect private or protected data. That's in GRAMA Part 6. Disposing of personal data according to retention schedules. That's in GRAMA Part 6, subsection 4. We're supposed to limit our data, or our use of data, to purposes and uses based off of statements we filed with the state archivist. Nobody has filed a statement in over 20 years with the state archivist. So when the public now is saying, where's my privacy? Well, we actually didn't quite implement GRAMA correctly when it came about. We also know all entities are really struggling when it comes to working with contractors, because nobody has the size or the negotiation ability to get these large corporations to do the privacy and security terms and conditions you need in your smaller contracts. So last year's bill established this forward-looking structure to say, from this point on, we're going to change it. This bill fulfills some of the promises we made last year. One of the things you're going to see in this bill is, one, we tie into what is existing code related to the chief administrative officer. In DAR's code, it was always their job to do these functions. This just makes clear you need to designate it and actually have it done. We also entirely repeal the Government Internet Information Privacy Act. That was established in 2004 and required any entity, if you collect personal information on your website, you have to give a notice about certain things, and you cannot collect personal data if you don't give that notice. Many entities have been non-compliant. That's very hard to overcome. So we've entirely repealed that chapter of code and moved those requirements into the Government Data Privacy Act so that we can say, from this point forward on new websites, we will come into compliance, we'll give proper notice, and we have to figure out over time how to bring existing websites into compliance. This act also is going to, it moves some of the governance structure of privacy into one chapter. So the Utah Privacy Commission has moved from the commission sections of code into the Government Data Privacy Act. So you can read one section of code to understand all your privacy obligations. We've worked into this code some transparency. Last year, there was no balance of when you collect personal data, what do you do if the data has to be public? Just because it's personal data does not mean it's classified as private. So this bill makes clear that if you're collecting personal data, all you have to do is tell the person on the form that this may be a public data. That's it. That's all you have to do for the notice. So we're trying to get that balance between what is a private record, what is protected, while also making it really easy for you to give a simple notice and tell them this is going to be public data. And then people can then choose, do they want to give that personal information? We've also updated this bill to make it easier to do breach notice. We know many cities and counties have large data systems that include public information. There are going to be breaches that happen. That's just the nature of technology. It's not realistic that you can give notice to every individual, especially if it's maybe it's your deed records and land use records. Some of these go back 100+ years. If you have a breach of public data that includes personal information, you would just give notice on your website. Otherwise, it would be very expensive to send out notices to hundreds of thousands of people. So that's part of the balance that we worked into this. In addition, in last year's act, there was a reporting requirement where all entities had to report certain things they're doing around selling of data, sharing of data, the existence of their program. We have now made this, one, an internal report. that is created by your chief administrative officer, who in code in the DAR section, this should be under. And this report should identify, have you started a privacy program? What are your practices in your program? How are you maturing it? And then all those things previously you'd have to report either to my office or to the state auditor's office are now just in your internal report that has made a protected record under GRAMA. And this is meant to allow you internally, because ultimately if you're elected, you are the ones that your government entities are accountable to. So that's who the report should go to. So this is essentially nothing but a plan of action. Are we doing privacy? How are we maturing it? And where are we having issues? And we've made it protected so you can have those sensitive conversations. Without this bill, that reporting is going to other entities and would be made public. We want you to focus on building privacy programs now, and it's going to take a decade plus to do that. That's what I've told the legislature. That's what I've told the governor's office. So we're trying to structure this about building your programs because it takes a long time to change 30 and 20 years of noncompliance. This bill also then clarifies the role of the state privacy officer, changes it to the title of state privacy auditor. You'll notice the only duties that change is we changed the name assessment to audit. That's all they're supposed to be doing is assessing and auditing. They're not building your programs. Every entity is building their own programs. Additionally, one other thing that is happening in the bill, my office is getting authority upon request of entities to have the ability to charge fees for services and rates for services. This is only in relation to government duties that you have under Part 4 of the bill. We have a lot of things we have to do, but some entities are saying, can you just do our duties for us? So for those entities that just want it done for them, there would possibly be a rate for that. We are anticipating for the smallest entities, we're already having discussions with the LLA program of how do we scale something that you can apply to 100 plus of the smallest cities at once, writing notice statements, helping them do contracts, helping to fulfill those duties, because some of these entities don't even have a single FTE. So that's where that conversation would come in. It is not meant to be for state agencies or any other political subdivision, a standard just rate or fee. It's just upon request, if you want the office to do it, we would have contractors lined up that you could just pay a fee to have them come and do your work for you. So I think that summarizes a big chunk of it. I know this is a big comprehensive bill. I'm sorry, but I mean, you have to think of it for what it is, though. 30 years of noncompliance. We're getting rid of a whole chapter of code, and it's giving elected officials at least somewhat of a clean slate to get started. My office does also get exemption and extension authority, and that's something we're already working on. We anticipate for counties, we've discussed, hey, we're probably going to need to extend that, initiate your program by 6 months so that you can get ordinance and stuff in place. That's an example of where we come in for cities too. How do we work through this? But this is nothing but getting the tools needed to actually do it. So.
So, Ryan Lynch from South Jordan City. One question or a couple questions are how are we funding or is there going to be any funding to help the city with the new reporting requirements, not the ones transferred over? And then also, and this is more technical, you're listing the CAO by definition referring to GRAMA.
Yeah, that's been identified. So in GRAMA and DAR's code, they use the term CAO. That since 91, every CAO has to have a continuous and active records management program that accounts for privacy, transparency, and use of data. We are having discussions of can we change that title to something else so it's not the same thing as how you use CAO for cities and counties. And we've had some discussions this morning on that of how to adjust that. And then is there going to be funding made available for this? Part of having a program is you should have documentation of what are you doing. Part of the CAO's job is also, if you go to the DARS section of code, to have the documentation of your policies, procedures, your duties, your functions, your determinations meant to protect individual rights. That is your program by definition. This internal report is nothing but a program documentation of what are you doing to build your program. So there's probably not any funding coming from the legislature to say, create a report, because that's part of just building a program 101 of you say what you're going to do, you do it, track it, and then strategize to do to the next thing. The reporting, though, is meant to show elected leadership, give you something to look at. Right now, your staff probably are not giving you anything in relation to that program. So this is supposed to help structure what that should look like. Oh, sorry.
Josh Collins, South Salt Lake. Question about the training for contractors that cities are supposed to contract with. How are we supposed to ensure compliance with that? Because it's difficult enough to get them to agree to be bound by the privacy requirements, especially with adhesion contracts or things like that. When it comes to these larger corporations or other entities that we're going to be contracting with, how are we supposed to ensure that they actually complete that training that's required by the state?
Yeah, so higher ed and K through 12, they started working on us with this about 6 months ago because they had identified the same issue of how are we ever going to get these contractors to do this training. So our strategy is, one, we're just making the training when it's available here in the next couple of weeks. It's available to everyone. Anybody can use it. You can tell a contractor, just go there and do it. But you'll notice that there's an update to the bill this year. And all the language is the same from last year, except for that new provision that essentially in the contract, you can require the vendor to do just an industry standard privacy training. Most Microsoft, Dell, Motorola, Flock for ALPR, they all do privacy training. So this allows you to just put in the contract, say, you do an industry standard training, and that's probably the extent of what you can do right now. And a lot of the bill, just so you know, it looks like it's tons of new stuff. You'll see a lot of it is just restated. It's broke out into cleaner sections. So then we can go into more detail like that as it needs to be flushed out each year.
I'm Dave Quayle from Salt Lake City. Just building on Josh's question, I understand you may have some Microsofts or even Googles that do an industry standard. They're in the tech industry. What happens if my contract is with Delta Airlines or the sole baggage sorting carrier in the country, and they don't care really what we have to say on things like what training Delta is going to provide to its employees? So just building on Josh's question, I think the problem goes further than just maybe tech companies who dabble in the world of privacy. So I just reiterate the question, slightly different companies or contractors we're looking at.
Yeah, so you can always refer them back to the statewide training that we would provide. Delta, I do know their CPO, but I get it. There's other smaller companies that won't do it. A lot of large ones do. That, in some instances, it's just a liability protection. You may just put it in your standard terms and conditions that they need to do industry standard privacy training. And then it would be on them. You're not going to have resources to audit and assess that. If you're bound by their terms and conditions, there's some other discussions that we need to have of how do we get a handle now of all these. How do we get scale and negotiation across all of our entities to get the right security terms and conditions? As a state, obviously, we're a large entity. We've done that for state agencies. We are discussing how to get that back to you. The other tool in the bill I want to emphasize is the extension and exemption aspect of it. We are well aware that contracts for local entities are very hard to negotiate. You may be paying $29.99 a month for SurveyMonkey, and there's no way they're going to do a custom terms and conditions with you. So we need to have a real conversation of how do we scale this? How do we help change the procurement process and the contract process? And what kind of extension or exemption is needed while that's worked out when some of these requirements just may not be reasonable to comply with at the time?
One more question. Oh, two more questions.
Yep. Todd Sharon, Harriman City. Thank you, Chris, for all your work that you put into this. I'm seeing a lot of good improvements from last year's bill. One concern that I have is that noticing you've changed over and you have some proposed new language. In that language, it states that if something is a public record, then we still have to get out to those people. But my question is if it's a public record, then essentially we're just saying we're going to comply with law. We're going to comply with GRAMA. So for every business license we get, we collect a lot of data, and we have a lot of forms. And to go around and putting this stamp of, by the way, we're going to comply with the law, and this might be a public document. Instead, it would, I don't know if the kind of like the hospitals do, have something on the front door that says we comply with these requirements when you come in here. So every business license that you fill out, that's subject to GRAMA and could potentially be a public document. And then at the time we get that records request, we'll do the redact that clear and it's not putting too much burden on us by redoing every single form we have.
Yeah, so keep in mind, for private and protected data, you are always supposed to be giving notice. Most of our forms don't have the GRAMA compliance statement for that. So now this concept of what is public versus what is private. Every entity is supposed to have comprehensive record series and schedules about what is public and private. We know most entities have not maintained their record series. Many of you are starting from scratch to create it. We're trying to do work to greatly simplify it, but the public right now has no idea actually what is public or private. That is just the fact of the matter. And this is across the board for all categories of entities. We need to rethink that foundational aspect of data governance and record series. With that said, though, how are we operationalizing this in state agencies? We've had the same discussion. What we've kind of worked through is the entities, if it's public data, they're just creating a portal on their site that says, here's all the different forms that may contain public data. They're creating a single QR code that has a P for privacy in it. And that's what they're putting on their form. And then anybody who goes or clicks that, then they can go and essentially see it on the list of everything that's made public. So that there's different ways to operationalize it, but there has to be some notice that this is going to be public data, so that people just know it's going to be public. The other aspect here we have to balance is many of you come before the State Records Committee, not that that's going to exist anymore. Probably shouldn't say that. I got a laugh here. Data you would think is public, then we come back and say, well, this is actually private. And so then it would necessitate a further notice. So my recommendation would be, let's go back and see what we can do to give notice. This is a much easier tool. Last year, you had to give notice of everything if it's personal data, even if public. This is a much simpler notice. And if we need to work that out with an exemption, extension, or clean it up next year, just like we said last year, we can do that next year, but let's see what we can operationalize this year that would make sense for entities.
You're good.
All right.
Okay, Chris, you're good. Thank you.
you.
Okay, Chris, appreciate you taking the time. I don't even know where we're at on the slides anymore. But, Jared's going to leave, right? When I was going to let him talk about things. Okay. So we're going to jump up. Maybe? All right. I'm going to find your slide. You can start talking 154.
Okay. How much fun? So 154 passed the House floor today, and I'm sorry, Senate was sent over to the House. We wanted to give you some key talking points here. If you remember, this is the bill, Senate bill that provided a process for challenging government entities' claim of attorney-client privilege. This allowed the legislative auditor to essentially come in and get documents and then challenge whether documents were privileged or not. There are a few, the sub actually took care of quite a few things that we were concerned about, but there are concerns still that need to be addressed. And I wanted to point those out here. OLAG, Office of Legislative Auditor General, selects the arbitrator. Secondly, the arbitrator must rule favorably toward access for the legislative auditor. Seems like a great standard, right? Municipalities must reimburse OLAG for the cost of the arbitrator, even if we win, say there's 10 documents that we're saying, hey, these are privileged, and we win 9 of them, well, we still reimburse for the arbitrator. So that's another key point to consider when talking to your legislators. There is no prohibition of OLAG disclosing the privileged information. It does say that if they obtain documents that are privileged, that it won't waive the privilege as it relates to others that want to see that privileged information. But what it doesn't do is prohibit the Office of Legislative Auditor to disclose that information. So those are some of the things that we feel like need to be addressed. And I should say this on SJR 4, which is a coordinating clause with SB 154, is that there is still a in this sub, it still has one paragraph that essentially overrides all of SB 154, which means that process no longer exists because of SJR4. So these are two bills. SJR4 is, I believe, up in committee tomorrow afternoon, and then SB 154 was just transferred over to the House. These are really, really important bills that you likely will be receiving emails on. So be aware of that, watch for that, and those are the key points if you wanted to reach out to your legislators now to discuss those. So, yes. Okay, this is the bill that discusses the what Chris just referenced is dissolving the State Records Committee and replaces that committee with an ALJ. Creates the Government Office of Government Records and appoints that director to a 4-year term as the ALJ to take records appeals. And we fully support this. We think that this is a good change. Last time we talked, they had taken out the balancing test. We would have loved that, but they put it back in because certain opposition to that happening. We're okay moving forward with what is here and hope that it moves forward. There's a few key points, though, to consider, and we have a handout for you so that you can use and thank some of you here for providing this. And it just talks about the changes. Here's what the current bill is, or here's what the current process is. Here's how it changes. And what you'll see on this handout is essentially the only thing that it changes is it just changes the State Records Committee to an ALJ. Todd wishes that the State Records Committee was not dissolved so he could stay on that body forever. But so that is, and we'll hand those out, but that's any questions on this one? Okay. Do you want me to start handing these out now or on the way out?
That's great.
Okay.
All right. Is everybody awake still? That's okay to say no. That's fine. So anyone who is here to talk about homelessness, we don't have any updates. That's the update. We're still waiting on sub language on several bills, but there's nothing substantive to talk about homelessness. So as they say in legislative committees, if you were here for that agenda item, you can leave now. But is Dave Davis here? No, he's not. Did Dave already leave? Well, Dave already left. All right. The other one, elections bill, HB 300. I know I've been saying this for 5 weeks now, but we are waiting on a sub on that one. The word is that we took a position of oppose on this one. Word is that we're going to see a substitute at some point. I have seen people, this is my update, I have seen people holding protected copies of the substitute, but I myself have not seen the language in it. So there's a substitute floating around out there on 300. We think it's going to go in a better direction, but waiting to see that drop publicly. And then we can talk about that one more potentially next week. So that's the quick update on 300. A couple other judiciary bills that we do want to talk about. First one is HB 451, judicial retention amendments by Representative Kyle. This would increase the threshold for a justice court, and this applies to all judges, but we only care about justice courts. Bill would increase the threshold for a justice court judge retention election from 50% plus one to 67%. There's somebody dropped something, or so raises that. Now, this is in rules as of right now. We don't know if this is going to move anywhere. To give you some quick history, looking back over the last 10 years of judicial retention elections, I was only able to find 2 judges who were not retained with a vote of over 67%. So there are only 2 judges that would apply to, and none of them were Justice Court judges. So this is a question, if this bill moves forward, and being where we're at in the session, we may not have a chance to check in with you again. But is this a number that anybody's concerned about, has thoughts about, questions about, if this were to move forward? So Paul over here, Lex has got the mic. And this number applies to all judges.
So this is all judges?
All judges,
Okay.
67%, yeah.
That
They're
was
not
my-
just targeting Justice
That was going
Court
to be my
judges.
question. My second question is, can it be amended to include legislators in that?
Just going to let that comment hang out there. All right. Any other comments or thoughts on this one? Again, it is in rules. I don't know if it's actually going to move anywhere this session, but just want to make sure it's on your radar if it does move.
Justin,
Yep.
Kathleen Alder,
All right. Oh, there you are, Mayor. Yep.
from Providence. What is the problem we're trying to solve here?
That is a great question for which I do not have a great answer. We know the legislative branch has had some beef, for lack of a better term, with the judicial branch, and I think that's part of where this is coming from. 80%? No, Lynn.
Yeah, Lynn Price, Sandy City. I don't know if you're going to bring up Representative Lisenby's bill that's also on judicial retention, but
there you go.
Anyway, I think the question, sort of a philosophical question we need to deal with as municipalities is, do we care about this judicial retention process because it affects our judges, or is that sort of their issue? Both of these are terrible bills in terms of policy and in terms of practice. The legislature is sort of dictating the process by which the independent judiciary, another branch of government, is or is not retained. I question the constitutionality of one branch of government influencing the retention process for another branch of government. But having said that, I don't know how much we care about the judicial process. And I think that would be the question I'd like to know, I'd pose for the group.
Yep. And that is a perfect question, Lynn. And I'm going to restate it a little bit here. And without trying to color it too much. But yeah, the key question is, are these good bills? That is kind of a good threshold question, good bill or bad bill. And then the next question we have to ask ourselves is that a thing that the league as a body wants to engage on or care about? There are a lot of bills up here. We're tracking 260 bills. Some bills are our battles. Some bills are not our battles, whether we like the bill or not. So again, without trying to color it, that is the question we need to ask exactly is this a thing that we want to engage in, that we want to talk about, that we want to be involved with, or is this one that we watch? So before we comment on this one, Mayor, is it okay if I actually talk about what the bill does before we get into 512? You don't want me to talk about the bill first, or you want to talk about the previous one? Okay, let me run through this one first then. So what this does creates the Joint Legislative Commission on Judicial Performance. Right now, we have the Judicial Performance Evaluation Commission, JPEC, and this would get rid of JPEC and make the much less easy to say acronym JLC-JP. Adds current Judicial Performance Evaluation Commission. So 5 reps, 4 senators, max of 4 and 3 from the same party. The duties would still be to obtain performance evaluations, discipline records. They may investigate any issue that the public raises, do a news release to request comments, and hold hearings about a judge's performance. For the election, now, if anyone doesn't know, for the Judicial Performance Evaluation Commission, that's a commission that goes out and does evaluations on all the judges. They have criteria they use. They put out reports. They let the judges see that before they are made public. And then that goes out on a website and in the voter information pamphlet when that was printed for the voters to look at and use. This puts the statement on the ballot as to whether or not this commission recommends for or against retention for the judges. And then there is also a statement in the voter information packet. This applies to all judges, including Justice Court judges. So that is what the bill does. Now, ready to take comments, Mayor.
So why do we care about this? So I'm coming at this, first of all, is that, I spent my first career as a litigator, and one of the hallmarks of the Utah judiciary is that we have had really good judges appointed through the process that we have, which basically is, a selection committee that makes a recommendation of names to the governor appoints, the Senate confirms. that this has resulted in the selection of some really qualified judges. And Utah has, I think, one of the best judiciaries in the country on the state level. The other thing is that the more we move toward making judges sensitive to elections, the more that we get fraught with issues about corruption and problems like that. And I've seen courts in other states where judges are actually elected, where they collect campaign contributions. And I'll just say, try a mining case in the state of Nevada and see what you get, because the judges there all receive campaign contributions from mining interests, which is big business in Nevada, and it's extremely difficult in any kind of case against a mining company, even to collect on a construction contract to win against big mining. So we want to avoid that. And why do we care about that as municipal officials? Well, we don't always agree with the legislature, and we haven't with them often at cities, but there are occasions where we may have to defend our rights under the open courts provision or the Ripper Clause. We've had conversations about those things. And the last thing we want to in this state is to have, a branch of our, 3 co-equal branches of government that is beholden to the legislative branch. So I just think this is legislative overreach. It's a reaction to some legislators not getting what they wanted with respect to some decisions in the last calendar year. But we all have to get over that. When the law gets applied, it doesn't always work the way you'd like to see it work. But having read some of those decisions, I'm confident that our court did a great job of analysis in that. So we do care about this issue. And while I think that publishing the findings from the JLC-JP would do a public service, there are other things in this bill that are bad. So.
Roger to the league. Most of you know me. I rarely take things really personal, but this one I do, for the simple reason that 40 some odd years ago, I created this process. For 5 years, we worked on this when I was the executive director of the Constitutional Revision Commission. We worked with an incredible group to take as much as we could partisan politics out of the selection process for judges. Let's make sure we're very clear what this does. This basically said that a legislative committee is going to put their effective endorsement on the ballot on these retention elections, and in effect to say, this is our judge. And that really deeply bothers me. If you don't think that if you rule against the legislature, it's not going to have an impact on this, then we're kidding ourselves. You appoint judges for your cities, and you have cases heard in courts that are heard. So that's why I find this so deeply troubling on this process, because this is strictly about eliminating sitting bipartisan. You put the numbers on, but there's a lot more voices that should be heard on this than just legislative voices. A lot more information that needs to be filtered than just legislative voices, and to put on the ballot. That's my biggest problem. In effect, says this is we have reviewed it. This is a judge that's acceptable to us. I find really troubling.
A couple more comments, and then we'll
I just wanted to echo what Mayor Silverstream and Roger said, but think about it for just a minute. If you win your child custody case, are you gonna write a positive recommendation for the judge? No. If you lose, you're gonna. If you go to jail, you're gonna. The only people that are gonna comment in this process, the way this is set up, are people that are mad. So you're just gonna have a cross section of mad people without knowing the details of their cases. JPEC is an amazing group. I got appointed to JPEC and I had to leave it because I couldn't spend the time that they take to evaluate judges. They evaluate judges at JPEC based upon lawyers and litigants who have actually tried a case or been in that courtroom and understand what's happening in the, with that judge in the courtroom. That's much better than getting anecdotal complaints from people who are mad at the outcome of a court case. And believe me, they get mad, and it's like anything. How many people send you a text and say, hey, great job, Mayor? No, it's usually, hey, Mayor, you suck. And then if there's someone to go complain to, that's even better for them. And besides that, if you're going to do this, I'd rather just elect the judges, which I'm not advocating for, but at least they're beholden to the people and not necessarily 9 people in the judiciary or in the legislative branch who may or may not have ever tried a damn case. So that's all.
I'd make a motion to change our position to oppose on this.
Okay, so we have a motion. So we have a couple of Slido questions. Is it okay, Mayor, if we do the Slido questions, we come back to your motion? Sorry, I keep jumping over from you. I've got one more, then I'm in trouble. All right, so first off, we have a Slido question here. How do you feel about HB 512 judicial retention? I just know many of you have already answered this, so thank you as we're wrapping up a lot of things here. So give you a minute more to talk about this. And then jumping over to our next one, and this may be moot depending on the motion that we just make, is how high of a priority is engaging on the changes to justice court retention procedures in HB 512? So we asked you your comfort level, now we're asking your prioritization level on how we engage with this. And then while people are filling that out, Mayor and Councilmember Bradshaw, since we're about to take a motion, I'm going to bring this back to you. So Mayor, go ahead. Yeah, we want to take the motion or what?
Remind us the bill number, not on 512, but also on the Kyle bill too. So he's saying both bills. So we remind me that number. So the motion is for HB 451 and HB 512 that the league take a position to oppose both bills. So we have a motion. Do we have a second? We have a second. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, call the vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Looks like it passes.
Okay, we will update the bill tracker accordingly. Last one on the judiciary, government immunity amendments. We've talked about this one repeatedly. There's some new language that's being subbed in that makes this bill a place where we feel like we can be neutral on it. So that one, so thanks to everyone that worked on that one. We think we've gotten to a good place on it. With that, Cameron, turn it back to you to talk about a couple of issues. If I can go back in the slides and find them.
I did.
There you go.
I did. That's the longest I think I've ever missed LPC in 17 sessions is being gone. That I guess, Mayor Walker, other than when my daughter was born, I missed LPC that day. So I guess I've now missed 1.5 LPCs in 17 years. So where are we at? Oh, public safety. Okay, then I'll come back to housing. Okay, so last week we told you if you hadn't read the Salt Lake Public Safety Plan, you should. It's an excellent framework for public safety, not just in Salt Lake City, but across the region. That in turn led to the discussion last week about House Bill 465. This outlines what's in House Bill 465. And then we did 3 different Slido questions of LPC to help figure out where and how we as a league should engage on House Bill 465. And this was the framework that we presented to you last week. Codify the contract requirement with DPS, but in a spirit of partnership, eliminate the threat of withholding the gas tax funds from the bill, and then finalizing the details if there is going to be a rapid response team, how it works operationally. So over the last week, we've been engaged in those steps with Salt Lake City and with other stakeholders. The House did pass House Bill 465 as drafted on Friday, with the acknowledgement on the House floor that the dialogue was still ongoing and they were continuing to move the bill. We've had multiple meetings now with House and Senate leadership, Salt Lake City and others, as we're trying to navigate this to a position that's consistent with the feedback you've given us and the concern. It was actually one of our highest scoring Slido polls of the concern around the compelled contract with the withholding of funds. It was one of the highest negative scores we've gotten all session. So we hear you loud and clear there, and we're continuing to engage in that space. Almost as high was the Slido you just did on concern about 512. Justin and I were looking at those results while you were making your motion, Mayor Silvestrini. So part of the reason we had recommended position pending is because we didn't want to get in front of the membership on it. So we were looking at Slido results as they were coming in as you were making your motion. Okay. So that's that's where we're at on 465. Any questions about the status here? This one is far from over. There's still 9.5 days to go. Let's go, Kim up front.
Kim Bell, Sandy City. Cam, I just wanted to clarify on the elimination of the withholding of the funds. That's just the road funds, does not include the mitigation funds.
So our ask of the legislature, which thus far has gone unheeded, has been both removal of the B&C funds and the mitigation funds. And there's been an acknowledgement about why they know why we hate that precedent. I mean, in my career up here, we have fought off double-digit number of bills or bill ideas that weaponize the B&C fund. And we don't want that precedent in code. And then there's the, like, how do you actually make this process work? And that's why I say there's still a lot of time to go. But the idea would be take those out so it's a true spirit of partnership in that interagency contract with Salt Lake City and DPS, and then still working through the questions about what it means for other cities that are in the space. Okay. Any other comments on where we're at on 465? I know a lot of you contacted legislators on Friday, and thank you for that, because I had multiple legislators come up to me and say, this is where the bill is for now, but keep the dialogue going. We understand why you're concerned. I'm a yes vote now, but you all keep raising these precedent issues behind the scenes. So, thank you, because that matters, and every little piece makes a difference in the conversation. Okay, on a related note, SB 195 was substituted Thursday afternoon. So when we presented this bill, Carson presented this bill a couple of weeks ago at LPC, and we were focused on different pieces of it. There's a new piece that was substituted on the Senate floor and passed on the Senate floor Thursday afternoon. So you can see the very complicated staff recommendation of, what I'm getting is, you'll see it in the top, I added the below sections are okay. So that's everything that as of Thursday afternoon was okay. Cassidy, don't you love all the text on the slide? I know you hate it. Sorry, running late last night. Okay, so here's what was added to the bill Thursday afternoon. Third substitute that puts a moratorium on Salt Lake City, and it is specific to Salt Lake City, doing a highway reduction strategy, which includes one of those 6 items, and then it requires UDOT to conduct a mobility and EIS or environmental impact analysis around highway reduction strategies. There have been more meetings about this bill since last Thursday than any other topic, as we've been trying to kind of figure out what is the problem we're trying to solve here, and is there a better way to solve that problem than the bill is currently drafted. Hence, the staff recommendation is to switch from support, which we had been until this new language came in, to oppose as drafted due to new language, working on alternative. Yeah, right. Yeah, sorry, Justin. I know that's messy. One data point that would be helpful for us in the conversation, we're going to gather from you from Slido here. These were some of the examples that are currently referenced in the bill. And so which of the following actions has your city taken in the last 3 years or planning to take in the near future? And it would be helpful. Part of the reason we had so many meetings on this conversation is we've been trying to point out to legislators that some of these strategies are utilized by cities across the state for different reasons in different places. So we don't want to have a chilling effect of trying to implement multimodal transportation because of how the bill is currently structured. And hold on one second, Paul. And there's been an acknowledgement from the leadership and the legislators involved in the bill that they support multimodalism. They're concerned with some specific problems, which then gets back to, okay, can we focus the bill and focus the dialogue on the specific problems rather than having these broader consequences? Paul?
The question I have is this targeted at only UDOT rights of way, or is it all city streets?
Yeah, the bill is currently drafted as all streets in Salt Lake City, which again gets back to what's the problem we're trying to solve. And we've made a lot of progress in the last couple of days of identifying what the problem is we're trying to solve. Mayor Silvestrini?
So this is truly the camel's nose here, and I think that we should ask for an amendment to the bill to provide the phone numbers of legislators who will entertain calls from my constituents who complain about speeding and wanting traffic control measures. Okay, that's one of the things we deal with constantly. We're just trying to make our cities safer and reduce pedestrian fatalities and make it so that we can do the things that we need to do as a growing urban area, which is promote, active transportation and walking. And I have a great example that Mill Creek has done in partnership with Salt Lake City. We had on Highland Drive from about, 27th South, roughly down to 33rd South, we had a 4-lane section of road. So 2 northbound lanes, 2 southbound lanes, no center turn lane, very little space to turn right even. We had a super high incidence on that section of roadway of rear end collisions, which actually slowed traffic more than anything you would think of, okay? We worked to reduce that roadway to a 3-lane section. So there's 1 lane going north, 1 lane going south, and a center turn lane. The businesses along Highland Drive asked us to do that to make it easier for their customers to turn into their businesses. The accident level has gone down dramatically, and the traffic actually moves better through there, even though we are adding hundreds of units of housing to the area. The traffic moves more smoothly than it did before. So to say that as a blanket statement, that this proposed statute says that we can't consider a lane reduction when it makes sense from traffic studies and science behind it is completely counterproductive, even to what the goals are of this legislation, which is to move traffic quicker, right?
Right.
This should be left to local governments that know best about the local circumstances in their communities, what our constituents want, and this bill is overreach. And I hate to say it because a lot of what Senator Harper had in his bill is admirable and supportable, but this is a poison pill, and I once again I think we oppose this.
Well, we are. Our recommendation is to oppose based on the principle. And I've spent more time on this topic than any other topic over the last few days, trying to identify the problem we're trying to solve, and then make sure we find the right balance between those different transportation needs and responsibilities of each level of government and different stakeholders as we proceed on it. So yeah, staff recommendations to oppose. This data will be helpful to us. Carson, I need this data in the next 9 minutes before the next meeting. Okay, we already did. Oh, go ahead, Mayor. I'm
Sorry.
hustling.
Mayor Nadolski, Ogden. Just make to mention that we've seen a recent spike in auto peds, and by talking to other municipalities, it sounds like that's a statewide trend. So I don't know if there's ever been a worse time for a bill like that. So if you can get your hands on some data, you might have a quantifiable position.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Mayor Nadolski, because part of the bill, and I think this part actually could be a long-term partnership and victory for all partners here, is a collaborative study with UDOT to look at these types of now I'm blanking on it's called highway reduction, but it's really more about safety, balance of uses, multimodalism, cars still being important, but then looking at these other ways to get around. So I think that study could actually be really beneficial to help identify problems, identify best practices, and implement it into Wasatch Choice and everything that we're working on there. So that piece, I think, has the potential to be a net positive. We're still trying to resolve the other piece, and I think we've made some progress over the last few days, and we have a meeting this afternoon on it too. Okay, I have to run to this next meeting, but the good news is they put housing at the end because there are not many updates. Reminder, we want your feedback. We're collecting all of your feedback from the Housing Strategic Plan so that we in turn can take that to state leaders. March 19th is when we need it. Since the last LPC, all of these bills have moved. I was just in the House Republican Caucus co-presenting with Representative White on House Bill 360 and 368, as well as with Representative Shepard on House Bill 320, because there were a lot of questions about all of those bills. I've put in red the legacy city language. So Mayor Nadolski, his team has been terrific, but this is a concept that we've talked about for a long time about how can the state help partner with established communities to convert rental units to owner-occupied units. And so right now there's language in the new sub of 360 that provides a path for cities of the first and second class, primarily focused on Ogden and Salt Lake City because they already have programs in place that can scale up to convert rental units to owner-occupied units. And if we can make this work, that opens the door to conversations for the Taylorsvilles and the Sandys and the Murrays and others going forward. This is a new housing bill. It's a resolution, but I knew this could cause a little panic if people saw it without context. This is HCR 14, a House concurrent resolution streamlining Utah housing policies. Basically, the gist of this is the state is in the process of reorganizing their agencies and who does what in the housing space. Because you have one agency that oversees HDRZs, and you have another agency that oversees moderate income housing plans, and they never talk to each other. So part of the reorganization with Steve Waldrop as the senior advisor for housing is to figure out how to consolidate everything at the state level. So this is focused at the state. If you just see the name of it, you may think, oh, you know, they're focusing on local government, but this really is focused on the state, and it's a resolution to give that direction as part of the implementation of the housing plan. The other thing I'll just give you an update on is we asked you last week in this meeting to contact legislators about SB 262. You did it. We got great feedback from the committee. The committee endorsed the bill, but several legislators said, I'll vote yes to keep the bill moving, but I have these questions that need to be answered going forward. Senator Fillmore circled the bill last week, and I'm expecting some pretty significant changes to the bill based on the concerns that we've raised, particularly on that general plan piece. So stay tuned on that one. And again, thank you for your efforts there. I need to run to, oh, that's right. You need to run back? Yeah, I've got to run. So last thing, we've said it several times, but your advocacy matters. Legislators are inundated with emails. In fact, when Mayor Monson and I were walking out of here, once a mayor, always a mayor, but as we were walking up to House Caucus together, I said, thank you for offering that tip, reminding people to have relationships with legislators. And he said, well, I hope they listen, because now that he's a legislator, he says he gets inundated with all of the mass emails, and his intern gets inundated with all these calls. But the calls he cares the most about are when his mayor and his council members are calling him. And there are a lot of legislators like that. So your advocacy makes a difference. And Friday was a perfect example that most of those bills stalled or stopped in order to give more time for dialogue, because they weren't ready for prime time yet, because you contacted legislators, we contacted legislators, and legislators said, keep working on it, and the bill sponsors agreed. So stay tuned. We got 9.5 days left of silly season. I apologize, I've got to run to another meeting, but thank you for being here. How many online? Awesome, 185 online. That's fantastic. So thank you, everybody. I'll turn it back to you.
Okay. All right, we have a couple more minutes, and we're going to use them. One of the bills that we ran over earlier as we were running through all the different bills, HB 504. I want to make sure you're aware of this one. Financial and conflict of interest disclosure by Canada amendments, which may be one of the longest bill titles of the session. HB 80 passed this last year, which required elected officials to file the conflict of interest form that I know so many of you loved so much this last year. This bill requires candidates for municipal office to file a conflict of interest disclosure form when declaring candidacy. It is not required if the candidate is an incumbent and already filed the form earlier that year. So if you're already in office, you already filed it this last year, you're not going to have to file it again. You'll just have to say, yes, this is all current and correct. The conflict of interest form are to be displayed online. Requires a candidate feeling a midterm vacancy to file the conflict of interest disclosure form 3 days before the meeting where you interview candidates. And finally, this also applies to county, local school board, special districts, legislative offices, and statewide offices for vacancies and for the other things. So want to make sure that's on your radar and get any feedback if anyone has any particular concerns about this bill. It's going to be your last chance to ever talk about it until you have to do it. Lynn. Okay, one over here.
Lynn Pace, Sandy City. I just want to make sure that last paragraph applies to legislative candidates, not just legislative vacancies.
That's correct. Legislators and legislative candidates already have to do this. They've been doing it for years. HB 80 took the form that they've been using and applied it down to municipal and local levels. So they already have to do this. It just now applies to vacancies for legislators, not just regular elections. Okay, Carson, give you one final bill, and then I think we have two final motions to make.
All right. Thanks, Justin. Yeah, I think it is the last one. There we go. Hopefully this is a short-term rental update. Thank you, Mayor. There's been a lot of kind of a flurry of discussion around this issue. The bill was, we supported it originally. Some of the other stakeholders expressed concerns, and huge thank you to everybody who agreed to be in the short-term rental work group on very, very, very short notice. And then even a bigger thank you to those who responded to the additional requests for information. So I was hoping to have a substitute for you today. It sounds like some of the stakeholders have had some other concerns pop up in the last minute. So I'm guessing we'll probably see a substitute tomorrow or the next day. But the gist of what we're expecting is that the bill will clarify the not well language. That's still the same. And then rather than state that municipalities can require short-term rental listing sites to remove listings that are inconsistent with ordinances and then require a business license field, now it will say municipalities can request that, which is not as strong as we'd like, particularly since it restricts our ability to regulate short-term rental listing sites otherwise. But the short-term rental listing sites have told us they want to come to the table, be good partners with local government. So this sort of compromise would try to encourage that, with the recognition that I think if cities start requesting listings be removed because they don't comply with zoning or don't comply with business licensing requirements, we'd like to track that and be able to come back and say, look, we have a really strong case to make that listing sites are not participating with local governments, listing sites are not cooperating. So that's sort of the concept we're discussing. Again, I'm not exactly sure where this final language will land because there's been some additional feedback in the last couple minutes here, but that's the gist of the bill we're anticipating. I will also just add that at one point, part of the reason this is softened is some of the stakeholders said the only way they could live with that is if there was a preemption on local land use around short-term rentals. Our work group, our policy resolution, everybody has said that is a hard line in the sand for us, and we conveyed that back to the sponsor. So good news, as of last night, there was no preemption in the bill for cities, but it will just say if you want to do a request, you have to let them or allow them somewhere. So it's still a little bit messy, but we think this is consistent with the direction that we've gotten from LPC in the initial draft, and then in the direction from the work group. Yeah, John.
Thank you. John Hiskey from Taylorsville City. One question was, to apply these new opportunities, a city does have to approve STRs somewhere in their city. Is that correct? You cannot be listed as not allowing STRs. Is that correct?
Yeah, just for that tool, if you don't want to allow short-term rentals anywhere in the city, and it doesn't say they have to be in residential or commercial zones, just says in a zone, which many cities allow them in commercial zones, but basically says if you don't want to do that, then basically just keeps the status quo. Not well language still applies. You can still get the not well language clarification. That'll be universal. And then the last piece, which I didn't mention, was the using the listing site for enforcing tax collection. That applies universally as well. So both of those pieces, still an improvement for cities who do not allow them anywhere. My understanding is that the universe of cities who do not allow them anywhere is pretty small. So that's where that conversation has been. We felt like it was reasonable to say if you want new enforcement tools, and although this is admittedly a softer tool, just allow them somewhere. That can be in a commercial area, that can be in a residential zone, wherever your city feels comfortable. All right, well, and so again, I was hoping to have a substitute for you, but we'll just continue as soon as that's public to work with that short-term rental working group, and just to make sure that that's still consistent with the policy that we've taken so far. So any other questions? I know we're out of time, so you can just reach out to me as well if you have further questions or concerns. All right.
I had a request from Mayor Ramsey to revisit an item we discussed earlier. Do we have the microphones on?
Yeah. Thank you. I'd like to just go back very briefly to HB 542 Economic Development Amendments. With all due respect to my colleague, Councilmember Bradshaw, changing our position from neutral to positive gives me cause for concern for one reason. It has nothing to do with the UEOC. It has everything to do with the new GOEO board that's being created that the league does not have a seat on. We had a seat on the UEOC, and the way the statute is written right now, this legislation is written, it doesn't give us a seat on the new GOEO board. And so in the interest of trying to negotiate to get a seat for the league, a permanent seat on that new Economic Development Board for the state of Utah for cities. I'd like to move that we move our position statement back to neutral instead of positive, because if we're already fully supportive, instead of support, if we're already fully supportive, they don't have to work with us on it. We've already supported it. I'd like to make a motion that we move back to neutral so we can try to negotiate for a seat for the league.
So we have a motion and a second to disagree with Kate in practice, but not in principle.
Right.
Which I'm willing to acquiesce to. So we have a motion and a second. All in favor on changing that position on, remind me the number again?
542.
HB 542, back to neutral. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right.
Thank you.
So with that, we are now, hopefully the league staff is keeping track of the whirlwind on our bill tracker. We are now to the point of meeting where we would ratify our bill tracker. Do we have a motion to ratify the bill tracker? Thank you. A motion? I heard several seconds. We'll go with Mayor Burton. Any discussion for the positions on the bill tracker? Seeing none, we'll call for the vote. Oh, sorry, Mike Black, Malcolm? As drafted. Okay.
Thank you.
We had a clarifying question. Did we oppose 444 as drafted, HB 444 as drafted? And we do as drafted on the tracker. Okay, back to calling for a vote on the motion. All in favor of approving the tracker, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, final motion. Who wants to adjourn? So moved. We're adjourned.